In July of 2186, the war was dragging on. The automatons had the biggest ship that had the biggest gun. The A.S.S, the biggest ship to ever sail the stars, with her guns as big as steers and her shells as big as trees. Out of a cold and dreary night emerged the A.S.S, unveiled its deadly laser upon Perennia 5. We then knew what we had to do to sink the A.S.S, with her guns as big as steers and her shells as big as trees. We'll find that automaton warship who's making such a fuss. We ought to sink the A.S.S, the world depends on us. We'll hit the decks a running, boys, and spin those guns around. And when we find the A.S.S, we ought to cut her down. A week into the hunt, High Command had laid a trap. The Tannis sector fortified, expecting an attack. 2 worlds had mobilized to meet the almighty tyrant Tsar, as the D.S.S quite cautiously prepared for either war. Without warning, the tyrant Tsar emerged from the stars, unleashed his super weapon before yet Briar could respond. By the time the D.S.S jumped in, the Tsar already fled, and instead there stood a vanguard fleet, immense and drawing near. We'll find that automaton warship who's making such a fuss. We ought to sink the tyrant Tsar, the world depends on us. We'll hit those decks a running and spin those guns around, and when we find the tyrant Tsar, we're gonna cut her down. The fog of war had cleared away, we knew just where she'd strike. A week later, the world of Mort prepared to face the fright. The A.S.S had jumped right in, quite certain of her rule, to be humbled by the entire fleet with every gun to bear. The Navy's guns were aimed and the shells were coming fast. The first shell hit the A.S.S, they knew she couldn't last. The mighty automaton warship is just a memory. Sink the tyrant Tsar's the battle cry that shook the sea of stars. We found the automaton warship who was making such a fuss. We had to sink the tyrant Tsar, the world depends on us. We hit the decks a running and spun those guns around, and when we found the A.S.S, we went and cut her down.